Today I want to talk about a macropad that I bought called the Sun20 Pro. I'll be unboxing and reviewing this macropad, but before we get into the unboxing, I just want to provide some background info. The group buy for the Sun20 Pro started in November of 2020 with a planned delivery date of March 2021. The Sun20 Pro was priced at $139 with a fixed shipping fee of $30. It didn't have any particularly special features compared to some of the other macropads or numpads, since many of these macropads do also feature knobs. But what stood out to me was the fact that it came in an aluminum case and looked really nice compared to most of the other macropads in the market. Each Sun20 Pro comes with an aluminum case, a hot swap PCB, an electroplated brass plate, and a knob. The color options available were pretty simple and clean, with the ability to mix and match if you bought multiple units since all cases were compatible. I took a long time considering the different options, but eventually decided on the Miracle colorway, which has black as a main color and white as a secondary color. To be honest, I was a bit skeptical about joining in on this group buy because I had never heard of Velocifier. But after doing some very basic research, it seemed like they were pretty reputable and generally focused on making more budget boards. They had run a couple group buys in the past and managed to deliver them to customers, so I felt a little more reassured that I would actually receive my macropad if I decided to join in on this group buy. March 2021 soon arrived, and while I didn't receive my macropad, other people on the server began to get theirs. A lot of people were excited to see these macropads since they looked really nice, and many people, including me, were really looking forward to getting their macropad in hand. However, reports then began to spring up that the color matching for the Brilliant colorway was off. The macropad is made of two pieces, and some people began to notice that the white used on the main piece did not match the white color used on the secondary piece. The other big issue that people were reporting was that the knob often came with dings or scratches, which made it look pretty bad. John, the main person who seems to run Velocifier, was quick to respond and reached out to those who were affected. It's not clear as to what solution was offered because the people affected didn't post about it, but I have to assume that a replacement was offered or at least a full or partial refund. Problems continued to persist as orders continued to ship, and John announced that they would be making more of an effort to double check QC before shipping, which did cause a bit of a delay. I finally got my macropad on April 21st, 2021, which was a month later than the estimated delivery date. But to be honest, delivery dates are rarely kept, especially with how COVID has impacted manufacturing and global prices for materials used in keyboards. Once you open the box, you see that there is foam that is used to hold the macropad in place, and each part of the macropad is wrapped in a thin foam sheet. Because I ordered the Miracle colorway, I can't really tell if the white is off because I don't have anything to compare it to. But it looks really nice and has a modern aesthetic, which was the main reason why I bought this macropad. Assembling this macropad is pretty easy, but for those who may be trying to assemble a keyboard for the first time, there are a couple steps to this. The first thing you should do whenever you get your keyboard is to test whether the PCB works. Using a metal tweezer, all you have to do is plug in the PCB to your PC, and then use the tips of your tweezers to complete the circuit by pushing them into the hot swap socket holes. VIA makes it super easy since it has a key tester function. After you make sure that your PCB works, you want to install the stabilizers. Stabs are not provided in the kit, so you'll need to buy some. You could try building the macropad without them, but it's not recommended as there are 3 2U keys which may wobble. In order to do this, we have to open up the case since you can't just pull the PCB out. Flipping the case over, we can see that there are 3 hex screws on the back that we have to take out. Note that the screws are of different lengths because the case has an angle. If you lose track of your screws and aren't sure which screw goes where, we can use some basic reasoning and deduce that the longest screw is for the back of the case, where the case is the thickest, and the shortest screw is for the front of the case, where it is the thinnest. This allows us to take off the side piece, which goes on top of the knob and has a diffuser for the LED strip below. Next, we take out the 6 crosshead screws that are holding in the PCB. After you remove them, we can then remove the PCB from the bottom case. For this build, I used some Wucha Studio original aspiration stabilizers that I bought when they were on sale during group buy. If you like the color of these stabs, you can still buy them off certain vendors like Canon Keys, but quantity is limited since they're just extras and are probably not going to be restocked once they run out. A package of 4 2U stabs and one 6.25U stabilizer originally went for $11 during group buy, but since the group buy is over, prices are now around $16 for the same bundle. It's still a good price for a set of stabilizers, so I think it would be a good option to look into if you need some stabs. Make sure you lube your stabs to prevent any rattling, and then put your stabilizers back together. The PCB has white L-shaped markings to show where the switches go, but in the places where the 2U keys go, we can see that there are extra sets of holes for the stabilizers. If you look closely, you also see that the holes on one side are larger than the holes on the other. This is because the stabilizer has 2 parts that need to go into the PCB. On the stabilizer, we can see that there is a place for the screw, and on the other side, a little piece of plastic that latches onto the PCB. The smaller hole is for the screw, and the larger hole is for the side that clips in. We want to first put in the side that clips in, and then the side that has the screw hole. After you've put the stabilizer on the PCB, flip it over and tighten the screw to hold the stabilizers in place. The OA stabs provide polycarb washers for the screws, but not all stabilizers come with them. The washers are placed on the screws before you fasten them in place to prevent potential shorting, but some people feel like it's not really necessary. There are DIY options such as using electrical tape and then poking a hole, but luckily, I didn't have to explore any of these options. I put the PCB back in the case along with the provided plate before fastening all the screws to secure the side piece. The plate will move around if you shake the case, because it is locked in place by the switches. For this build, I went with some NK Silk Blacks from Novel Keys, because I was kinda lazy and didn't want to go through the trouble of opening switches and lubing them. NK Silk Blacks come pre-lubed with Krytox 205G0, and not some factory lube, and according to some popular keyboard content creators like Teha Types, the lube job isn't all that bad. I was being lazy this time around, so I won't be demonstrating the process of lubing and filming switches, but I will go through this process in a later video when some of my keyboards arrive. Because the Sun20 Pro features a hot swap PCB, no soldering is necessary, and we simply push the switches into each hot swap socket. Make sure that the pins on each switch is straight and isn't bent, or else they won't go into the hot swap socket and you'll end up with a messed up pin instead. If you test the switch later and find that it doesn't work, this might be your issue, and all you have to do is pull out your switch to check. The pins will be bent out of shape, but you can just straighten it out and then plug it back in. The keycap set I used for the Sun20 Pro was a numpad from the PBT Crayon. It's really plain and there isn't anything special about the keycaps, but I wanted to keep a clean and simple aesthetic, so it was exactly what I wanted. The legends for the numbers are clear, and I really like the font because it doesn't feel too rigid or formal. To be fair, they are black and white keycaps, so it's kinda hard to go wrong. Now for my review. There were a couple issues that I had with my macropad. Out of the box, I noticed that there was a small ding to the knob. I wasn't able to get a clear shot with my terrible camera skills and lighting, but it's there. It's not an issue for daily use, and I don't notice it for the most part when using the macropad, so I don't really mind it. The bigger issue is the fact that one of the LEDs on my macropad is broken. When I tried to change the color of my LEDs to show white, the LED showed a pink magenta color instead. I thought this was super weird, so I changed the lighting scheme in VIA to RGB test lighting. This lighting mode cycles through red, green, and blue to show any potential issues with your LEDs. And for that LED, it showed red and blue but not green, which means that unless I choose a color that can be created purely off of using red and blue light, that one LED won't match with the others. The issues with my macropad weren't as bad as some of the other cases, but I emailed the contact information provided on the Velocifier website just to see if I could maybe get a replacement PCB. Leonore from Velocifier responded pretty quickly and offered a $10 refund for the knob, but stated that they would not be able to replace the PCB. Although I was slightly disappointed, it really isn't that big of an issue because my keycaps cover the per key RGB for the most part. If I really do want to fix it, it should be pretty straightforward, and all I would have to do is to desolder the LED and replace it with a new one. typing on the macropad, it sounds pretty bad if I'm being honest. The 1U keys don't sound great, but the 2U keys do sound pretty bad due to all the space in the case. There are ways to reduce the hollow sound by putting foam, but I chose not to do so because I honestly won't be typing on the macropad that often, so it's not like it's really going to bother me all that much on a regular basis. I know it's kind of against the spirit of DIY and building keyboards, but I really don't feel like spending more time or money on it. From what I've gathered, the best places to put foam is in between the plate and the PCB, and also near the side piece where the LED strip is. It's not recommended that you put foam between the PCB and the case, because there isn't much space there and it might cause your PCB to flex. The knob on the Sun20 Pro isn't a smooth twist, and has a bit of resistance and click for each level. Some people have reported that their knob feels really scratchy, but my unit was fine. Pushing in the knob, the clicking sound isn't all that great, and some people have reported that their unit sounds pretty hollow when doing so. The provided knob feels kinda cheap, and doesn't really match the renders, but it will do its job. You can find cheap knobs online to replace the one they provide. Just make sure that it's the proper size and will fit on the rotary encoder shaft. During the initial group buy and IC phase, one of the features that was being advertised was QMK and VIA compatibility. When orders began to ship out, people began to ask for these files, and while Velocify was able to provide the VIA JSON file, they did not provide a QMK file. It wasn't a big deal for me, but for other people, this was one of the key features and a main reason as to why they joined the group buy. Although VIA does allow a lot of customizability, it cannot compare to what QMK allows you to do. If Velocify had disclosed that they wouldn't be able to provide the QMK file before the group buy, or early on in the group buy, this wouldn't be an issue because people can choose to not join in or ask for a refund. However, this information wasn't made public until much later when orders were already shipping out. As I was writing the script for this review, John has provided more updates regarding the QMK files, where it seems like their manufacturer is now working on getting a working QMK file. This is good news for those looking to program their macropad, but it does have me wondering if the people at Velocify would have done this had there not been backlash on the server. Overall, my experience with the macropad wasn't too bad, but there were a lot of other people who had problems with theirs. From the color matching issue to scratch cases, and even a few broken PCBs, and almost everyone had a scuffed knob, with some being worse than others, my confidence in Velocify and running a successful group buy has greatly dropped. The issue with the QMK file was honestly really frustrating, even for someone who doesn't plan on using QMK. They did eventually answer the questions on the Discord channel, but it felt like they didn't have the Sun20 Pro customers as a priority due to the fact that the group buy had already ended and they already got their money. The Sun20 Pro is one of the nicest looking macropads out there. It has nice color options with an LED strip for aesthetics and even a knob, which is a highly sought after feature. However, with all the problems with Velocify and how the board actually turned out with poor typing sound, I do not think that this macropad is worth the $139 plus $30 shipping that they were asking for. They do have plans on running an R2 with Bluetooth functionality, and hopefully they can fix all these problems by then. But for those of you who are looking to join in other group buys, I think that it's a good idea to be cautious and skeptical, just so that you don't set yourself up for disappointment.